A long, long time ago, back when I was in high school, I remember experiencing a change in administrations. But it wasn't the White House that had changed hands. We were introduced to a new principal for our school. It was radically different from the one who came before. To recognize this new administration coming on board, our high school yearbook chose the theme of changes. And as a young, up-and-coming cartoonist wannabe, I was assigned the job of creating the artwork that highlighted some of the new changes that were happening. Now, fast forward about 52 years, and we're all about to go through another transition period, this time at the national level. With the inauguration of President Biden only 4 days ago, we're all preparing for a very different government, one that will be devoted to uniting and unifying the country rather than tearing it apart. But obviously, change will not come easy. Those among us who are older may remember another big change in government, this one almost 90 years ago. Franklin D. Roosevelt took office in 1933 and immediately went to work, rescuing the country from the worst depression it had ever experienced. In his first 100 days, together with Congress, a new benchmark was established against which all future administrations would be measured. And during those days of the Great Depression, however, relief could not come fast enough. There was a popular song from that time, made famous by singers like Bing Crosby and Rudy Valley, that expressed the hard times everybody was going through. "Brother, can you spare a dime?" really captured the hopelessness of unemployment, failing banks, plunging farm prices, factory shutdowns, and worst of all, a growing homeless population that numbered in the millions. Big change was needed, and Roosevelt stepped up to the plate with his revolutionary New Deal programs. But then, as now, the changes he proposed were not universally welcomed. The big money, big power interests responsible for plunging the country into depression did not like losing their control or their power and prestige. So they fought Roosevelt, especially on regulations designed to protect average people from the unfair practices of unscrupulous employers and predatory banks. And so now we're at a similar crossroads. The changes that will be needed to get this country out of the political, economic, and pandemic problems we're all suffering through will no doubt be controversial. And not just with big corporations, but also among many white supremacists, radical troublemakers, and even ordinary citizens who may still support the outgoing president. They're not going to miraculously go away or simply change their minds overnight. It's very tempting to take a black and white view of the situation. In other words, to see it only as us versus them and not go any further. There's a story from Elie Wiesel, the famous writer, Nobel Prize winner, and Holocaust survivor, that describes this paradox. As he tells it, there were once two travelers in Africa, standing at a river which they were about to cross, when they noticed some crocodiles looking at them. "Are you afraid?" says one man to the other. "Don't you know God is merciful and good?" "Yes, I do," says the frightened man, "but what if God suddenly chooses right now to be good to the crocodiles?" I think a lot of us have the same fear. Regardless of which side of the political divide we're on, the concern seems to be that one party or the other is going to walk away with a bigger share of the pie. It'd be pretty simplistic just to say, since God loves everybody, maybe it isn't an either-or question at all, and God will be good both to the crocodiles and the scared travelers. In different ways, of course. But as with any paradox, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. It is possible to have both sides arrive at some sort of mutual benefit. Not the kind of compromise, of course, that followed the Civil War, when Reconstruction was abruptly canceled and the hard-fought racial justice gains were replaced by decades of Jim Crow segregation. No, my friends, I'm thinking of a more equitable compromise this time, a true win-win scenario. Unfortunately, what exactly that will look like at this point is still anybody's guess. There's a lot of hard work left to do before we arrive at the next stage in our country's very delicate experiment with democracy. Maybe what we need is a kinder, gentler approach. Instead of crocodiles, let's talk about gardening. The writer Anne Scott shares this reflection. She says, "I've always been fascinated by the compost pile just outside our garden. It contains bits of old food, thick and gnarled weed roots, rotting flowers, eggshells. It seethes with life. And over time, with moisture and heat, this decaying pile of unwanted organic matter becomes sweet-smelling, fertile, crumbly compost. And so it is with the discarded parts of ourselves that we have swept under the carpet. Under the watchful eye of the observer, all that we have rejected, denied, and hidden is exactly what can nurture our growth." So according to Anne Scott, it's actually the garbage, the discards, the decaying organic matter that serves as fertile soil for new growth and change. Come to think of it, isn't that the thought expressed on the Statue of Liberty? As the poet Emma Lazarus once said, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." And being as most of us are all immigrants in this country, except for Native Americans, we're all part of a big compost pile yearning to breathe free and find new opportunities to nurture growth for all of us in this very diverse nation. I've got another story for you, also on the subject of change and unexpected solutions. In this one, the author Megan McKenna writes, "Once upon a time, there was a king who ruled a small kingdom. It wasn't great, and it wasn't really known for any of its resources or people. But the king did have a diamond, a great, perfect diamond that had been in his family for generations. He kept it on display for all to see and appreciate. People came from all over the country to admire it and gaze at it. But then one day a soldier came to the king with the news that although no one had touched the diamond, for it was guarded night and day, the diamond was cracked. The king ran to see, and sure enough, there was a crack right through the middle of the diamond. Well, immediately he summoned all the jewelers of the land and had them look at the diamond. One after another, they examined the diamond and gave the bad news to the king. The diamond was useless. It was irredeemably flawed. The king was crushed, and so were the people. Somehow they felt they had lost everything. And then out of nowhere came an old man who claimed to be a jeweler. He asked to see the diamond. After examining it, he looked up and confidently told the king, "I can fix it. In fact, I can make it better than it was before." The king was shocked and a bit leery. The old man said, "Give me the jewel, and in a week I'll bring it back fixed." Now the king was not about to let the stone out of his sight, even if it was ruined. So he gave the old man a room in the castle, all the tools and food and drink he needed, and he waited. The whole kingdom waited. It was a long, long week. At the end of the week, the old man appeared with the stone in his hand and gave it to the king. The king couldn't believe his eyes. It was magnificent. The old man had fixed it, and he made it even better than it was before. He had used the crack that ran through the middle of the stone as a stem and carved an intricate, full-blown rose. A rose, complete with petals, leaves, and thorns, into the diamond. It was exquisite. The king was overjoyed and offered the old man half his kingdom. In the king's eyes, he had taken something beautiful and perfect and improved upon it. But the old man refused in front of everyone, saying, "I didn't do that at all. What I did was to take something flawed and cracked at its heart and turn it into something beautiful." Maybe, just maybe, in this current situation of the United States of America, our nation is a little like that diamond. We've had some cracks in our culture for some time now, but for years we've kept sweeping our problems under the rug. The once beautiful diamond is a bit more tarnished now after 245 years of history. A lifespan that has seen wars, injustice, natural disasters, economic hardship, social upheaval, plagues and epidemics, families being torn apart. The list goes on and on. So we know that we have some serious problems to address. And the changes that will be needed to solve them aren't going to happen without more division and disagreement, unfortunately. That's a given. The big question is, where do we start? How do we do what needs to be done? Some experts say that the first step towards healing our world is actually looking inside ourselves. Anthony DeMello once wrote about a disciple who was always complaining about other people. So the master, or guru in DeMello's story, said to this disciple, "If it is peace you want, seek to change yourself, and not other people. It is easier to protect your feet with slippers than to carpet the whole surface of the earth." Along those same lines, Frederick Rousseau once reflected that it is truly much easier to demonize enemies and blame things on something outside ourselves. In fact, it's well known that not only individuals do this, but also organizations, cultures, and nations do it as well, by making enemies of people who are different from ourselves. The Russian writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn once said, "If only it were as simple as separating bad people from the rest of us. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his or her own heart?" I know from personal experience how easy it is to just get mad at others and wish that they would change their ways. But it never seems to happen. And if you say anything to try to change their mind, you've only succeeded in making matters worse. It reminds me of that old saying, "Never wrestle in the mud with a pig. You just get dirty, and the pig actually loves it." So if we're supposed to be focusing on ourselves rather than on changing others, how do we go about it? Gerald Epstein offers this suggestion, saying that we can assume a new attitude towards our problem, affliction, or illness. As Epstein says, we need to undergo a change of heart. Instead of thinking of our illness or some other problem as an enemy, we need instead to create cooperation between the illness and ourselves. We should treat it as an authentic and genuine part of our being, not as an alien or outsider to be shunned and despised. Rather, it is a messenger that reflects our own inner imbalances and needs to be integrated back into our lives. The integration takes place through love. We treat the illness or problem with love or a loving attitude. The illness is our closest neighbor, closer than any family members or friends. When we are in pain, we are closer to that pain than to anything or anyone else. Do not hate your ailment, for it will hate you back. Replace hate with love, says Epstein. So maybe this notion of a compost heap isn't that far off after all. When we learn to love the dark, ugly, smelly parts of ourselves that we prefer to keep hidden, it's only then that we can open ourselves up to the possibilities of creating real growth out of the seeds and manure that we've been given. So pretty much it's all in our attitude, how we see ourselves and others. If we think of somebody else as a jerk, then it's very likely they're going to live up to our expectations. If, on the other hand, we approach them as a potential new friend to be made, then the result may be entirely different and much more to our liking. We may even be able to win them over eventually to our way of thinking. And change, as we know, starts with small baby steps. Speaking of babies, the one thing all babies have in common is that they need to be changed, and quite often. So why don't we recognize the value of changing things up for adults, or for a whole country? Why do we get so stuck in our ways? There are all sorts of explanations for that, I suppose, especially when you delve into human psychology. Probably one of the simplest reasons is that change takes more effort, more work, and more energy than just letting things stay the same, at least in the short term. But as experts have also pointed out, not making necessary changes in a timely manner can also lead to more work and more expensive adjustments down the road. The whole issue of global warming and climate change is a perfect example of that. The longer we delay, the more costly and catastrophic the problem will become. Diving back into my own compost pile of fertile thoughts about change, healing, and growth, there's one last story I'd like to share with you. This one also comes from Anthony DeMello, who we mentioned earlier. DeMello was a world-renowned Jesuit priest, psychotherapist, and teacher of spirituality who made his home in India. And here's how DeMello tells the story. The great teacher Buddha was once threatened with death at the hands of a marauding bandit. So Buddha, begging for mercy for himself, said to the bandit, "Please, sir, be good enough to fulfill my dying wish." "And what is that?" asked the bandit. "Well, if you can, please cut off the branch of that nearby tree," Buddha asked. And so, with one big slash of the sword, it was done. The branch was now lying on the ground. "So what now?" asked the bandit. "Put it back again," says Buddha. The bandit laughed. "You must be crazy to think that anyone could do that." "On the contrary," says Buddha, "it is you who are crazy to think that you are mighty, because you can wound and destroy. That is the stuff that little children do. It is the mighty who know how to create and heal." So, my friends, perhaps that is the challenge that now lies before us. Buddy, can we spare some change? Because we have an awful lot of changing, healing, transforming, understanding, and coming together that needs to happen over the next 4 years. And we all need to be involved in the change. To do this, all we need is love. Amen.